Light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. The point of this show, and the reason the introduction is filled with question words, is because we wrestle with questions and we try to come up with insights and distinctions, and to ask who, what, where, why, when, what next, all these different questions, and to seek answers but not permanent answers, tentative answers that grow and change with whatever new information becomes available. Going through, throughout my childhood and going through the public educational system at the time, and even through the Catholic elementary school I went through, it was during the years that are now referred to as the Cold War years, where there was this kind of undeclared war between the United States and the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And the people respond to words, and all too often without thinking about what the words mean. When one stops for a second and says, wait a minute, let's look at the words, every time people refer to people in the USSR or in Russia, the two terms were kind of used interchangeably, but they really were never the same thing, because Russia was only one of the republics within that union. But another ways that words were used interchangeably that really didn't mean the same thing. The structure of the USSR was socialist, in that it was a society determining all sorts of things for individuals, regulating markets and managing needs and all sorts of things, in some ways more effectively, in some ways less effectively. It depends on which particular part you're talking about. From over here in the United States, though, as I was growing up, we always heard them referred to as communists, because there were farms and people worked on the farms in a communal sort of fashion, and yet to someone who is an economics major in college, socialism and communism are really not the same thing. And then someone else attempted to educate me more recently in distinguishing between political systems and economic systems. That if you have, one refers to who makes the decisions, and the other refers to how the money is dispersed and circulated throughout the particular nation or community or cooperative or federation. I mean, in the European Union now, there are all these separate nations, and yet the EU is something over that, but it's more economic than it is political, I guess, except that certain requirements are made of the member nations. But in any case, in my understanding, socialism means that the decisions are made by society as a whole. In communism, the decisions are made by the respective communes. And so that raises the question of, if you have different communes within a nation, does that mean that every commune has a certain degree of autonomy, and what things fall into the realm of national decisions and supersede the communism? Socialism, as I understand it, is usually something more at a national level. The quirky thing about economic, and I suppose even political systems, is that if the only thing you could add is unconditional love throughout everybody involved, unconditional love between everybody within any particular country, that by the presence of unconditional love in practice, in belief, in reality, any system would work. Democracy, capitalism, socialism, communism, whatever ism you want to name, they would all work if you had the fundamental reality of love. In trying to say, okay, if you don't like capitalism, what is going to be our economic system? Well, again, presuming that love is there so that any system would work, and I guess that what I'm about to suggest is especially oriented to the presence of love throughout a society. And that is that, in my opinion, the system that I would recommend most is what I call organic communism, or organic socialism, I suppose. I think probably it's more organic communism, though, because part of what makes my idealized utopian conception of an economic system work is knowing each other, knowing the recipients, that within a commune, being close enough and local enough that the person with the supply knows the person with the need and responds. And the thing that makes it organic is that it is not dictated from the government thousands of miles away. It arises from within each person. It's the individual saying, I have more than I need. Where are the people in need with whom I can share this? And the person in need saying, without any fear of being shamed or disgraced or looked down upon, yes, I am experiencing a need. I could very much put that to good use. In a similar way to all this, I have for a number of years tried to live by the principle that everything should be wherever it can do the most good. And the thought that just popped into my head as I said that was this wonderful little scene in the movie Beaches, in which a young girl who grows up to be the character played by Bette Midler helps a friend who is the daughter of a wealthy family, and this woman who's standing nearby hands her a $20 bill, and the young Bette Midler's character says, "What's this for?" And the wealthy woman responds, "To keep you honest." And I thought that was just the most wonderful sort of thing to infuse in that being wealthy, she understood that here was something she could do, and that giving a $20 bill to this stranger who had helped this young girl from a wealthy family, and I can't remember if it was an aunt or the mother or who this woman was who gave the $20 bill, but that she recognized it as significant, that this was to keep you honest, to meet your needs so that you don't have to do anything illegal to get your needs met, and that the world is a sufficiently friendly and supportive place that you don't have to escape from reality into some addiction because dealing with daily life is just so oppressive you don't even want to think about it. Some problem that is so overwhelming and leaves you feeling so powerless that you need some escape from reality. If reality was instead governed by people loving each other and being there for each other and giving a $20 bill from time to time to say, this is to keep you honest. This is so you don't have to do anything unusual or extreme or illegal or adversarial to get your needs met. You can have the food, clothing, shelter, whatever you need. I still love this term that a past boyfriend suggested to me once when we were talking about the way certain people with financial excess flaunt their wealth. And I said it's shameful to do that while somebody is in need. How could I even think, if I were to win the lottery, how could I even think about building something that was more than I could use while being aware of someone who was suffering and doing nothing about it? I may not be able to solve all the world's problems, but as Loretta Young said in the movie Christmas Eve, that's such a poor excuse for doing nothing. That for me, organic communism would be the natural way of being. That when I have something to share, I do so. And so I try to live by this principle that everything should be wherever it can do the most good. And there have been a number of times over the last 10 years where somebody near me will have a need, and I will say, well, I have this. I'm not going to throw it away because it's a valuable resource, but it seems like you need it more than I do right now, so I'm giving it to you. And I just ask that if at some point you don't need it, you pass it to another person who needs it. Everything should be where it can do the most good, because we we don't always have opportunity to do good. We live in this world, we deal with various circumstances. Sometimes they're blessings and they're wonderful and we have abundance, and sometimes we're just running short and trying to figure out how to survive while doing without. And that's when it is so important and it makes such a difference to have people around who also believe, in this basic principle of helping those in need and giving whatever they have to share. Most of, when I was growing up in a poor and working class environment, we didn't get to go eat in restaurants very often, and so eating in a restaurant at all was considered a big deal, and we never went to the most expensive restaurants because they simply weren't affordable. But that being the case, most of the communal meals I remember were potlucks at church or school or in a park or something. Everybody would bring whatever they could. It'd set all the food on a table, and everybody would come along with paper plates and get whatever they wanted. And that was how we all had a feast, by sharing our resources together. I don't, in other places I've lived since then, there have been a few places where I get the impression that some people have never heard of a potluck, or the very notion of, bring a dish to share, and everybody brings a dish to share, and so then there's enough of us and we just share all the food. And of course the host in most of these cases is saying, everybody take your food home with you because I don't have enough room in my refrigerator for all this. When we come together and share our resources, we usually have more than we need and more than everybody can consume. And there's always leftovers, always. I don't think I've ever been to a single potluck where there weren't half-finished dishes of some entree or dessert or whatever going home with people again, because it was more food than everybody could eat, than all of us together could eat. If we have more together, that comes back to this quality of what I call organic communism. That it's not the government ordering me to share what I've got. It's not someone saying, I'm going to take your taxes and spread them all around. Though I understand in Scandinavia, people really don't object to paying taxes because the world they live in is so well managed and so efficient that they feel like they're getting their money's worth when they do pay taxes. And that is a system that could be employed anywhere else as well. Sure, I'll pay the taxes, but you better expect me to hold you accountable to doing a good job with them. But that means being involved in your government instead of letting your government run on autopilot. The whole point of organic communism is that it starts within each individual, like within that woman saying, here's $20 to keep you honest. Here's a tool or a resource. I remember giving somebody a basketball hoop for their kids to play with once, so they could play basketball in their own yard because there wasn't a park nearby. Well, I have it, I value it, but you need it more than I do, so here. And there have been countless times when others have given to me as well, and I try to honor every giver by making the best possible use of that gift. This again is organic communism. It's regarding all of humanity as my family, all of humanity as the commune of which I'm part, and that as the commune takes care of me, I also do whatever I can to take care of the commune. And I do it because I choose to, not because I'm ordered to, not because the government will fine me if I don't. I do it because I choose to. It's not an imposed system, it's a system that grows out of me, and that's why I refer to it as organic. It's life growing up and expressing itself in a way that further affirms life. It's the energy of life flowing from one form to the next, to the next, to the next, in an infinite chain, so that when something gives its life so that my life can continue, I sit down to my mealtime prayer and I say, may I live a life worthy of the sacrifice. And that is the way that I show gratitude for whatever food I receive, whether it's vegetable or animal or whatever it is. That or mineral, I guess, if you put salt on your food. What is inherent within all of that, though, I guess, is it's like the way you act, the way you eat, the way you give, the way you receive, it's all validating the interconnected web of life. That there, and I found when I was growing up that I knew there were rich people in town and they lived in big fancy houses and so forth. And it really didn't bother me that they were wealthier than I was as long as I had all my needs met. I really didn't care whether they drove a Mercedes and I drove a Chevy, or they had a brand new car and I had a used one, whatever. I get where I'm going, and that's okay. It didn't bother me that there were differences. It bothered me when I had to do without because somebody had more than they needed and they were not participating in organic communism. They were participating in pathological narcissism, selfishly thinking that if all of the working class people disappeared, that they could just go on living their luxurious, excessive life. And as this past boyfriend, the wonderful term that he gave me, conspicuous consumption. And I thought that was such a good way to put it, that there is consumption happening, and it's wasteful, and it's conspicuous, and it is being done in a way that specifically puts other people down and reminds others of their doing without, of their lack, of their shortcomings. I don't see any justifiable reason for it, because I can do what I need to do to make myself happy and get my needs met without it being some kind of statement against somebody else. I can live in an adequate, warm house. Well, going back to the frontier days, if you look at some of the old antique houses and such, it was explained to me once that the reason they have all this gingerbread stuff and extra boards all over the place and sunrises and all kinds of frou-frou and whatnot, by putting all this excessive and totally unnecessary wood trim all over their houses, it was a way of demonstrating to the whole community that, hey, we're wealthy and you're not. And you could tell which were the rich houses because of how they were designed. Even in my childhood, everybody, on Sundays occasionally, on the way home from church, we would drive through the doctor's section of town because there were all these big, lavish houses that were so unique and different, and I would say in retrospect impractical, horrendously impractical houses. And the same with those frontier houses, with all that extra wood trim on there, and a lot of it was painted all different colors. It would take you forever to repaint the house because you had to have different colors for each different part, and you had to be really, really careful so that you didn't get paint on the wrong part. It was so completely wasteful, and it would have made so much more sense from the perspective of organic communism to say, I have a house that is warm, safe, and dry. It's not ugly, it's not totally plain, but it doesn't need to be excessive. Instead of spending that money on excessive ornamentation that is labor intensive for maintenance, I'm going to use this money to build some solid, energy efficient houses for working people in my town, because when the working people are happier and I'm perfectly content, the whole town becomes happier and everybody starts taking care of each other. And if anything goes wrong, everybody comes running to help. And if someone has misfortune, like in the farming community where I grew up, there were so many machines, and farming by its nature is such a dangerous industry because of all these machines, that every year somebody would be hurt in some kind of accident. Slipped on something and fell. Some guy. There was one guy who was trying to get something out of a baler once, and it jammed, and then the clutch slipped, and the machine suddenly kicked into motion. And before he could jerk his hand out, it grabbed his hand and pulled his arm into the machine, and literally impaled right through his hand. And so he was way out in the field, didn't have a cell phone because it was before all that, and he managed to somehow kick the tractor into gear and walk alongside it enough to get back toward the house where somebody could see him. And so now he can't do his work for however many months because of this injury. And every year there was some accident like that, somebody who fell on something or broke a leg or something where they wouldn't be able to do their field work for that season, and there wasn't anyone to take up the slack. And one morning, unannounced, suddenly 30 or 40 tractors would show up in the front yard, in the driveway, and it'd be farmers from everywhere within 20 or 30 miles, and they would plow, disc, and plant the entire farm in one day. And somebody would come running from the newspaper to take a picture of all these tractors staggered across the field, coming across, turning the whole field under with plows in a matter of minutes. And it was such an amazing communal response. And of course it cost the farmer absolutely nothing, because it was neighbors taking care of neighbors. It was organic communism. It was showing up and putting whatever equipment they had to its best possible use, that everything should be where it can do the most good. And that's exactly what they did. And it wasn't about what church you went to or what race you were or whether you were rich or poor or whatever. It was about the fact that this person had suffered misfortune, and that sort of misfortune could happen to any one of them. And so in order to have that same sort of karmic investment, I guess you could say, everybody would participate, because they knew that next year or the year after, it might be them. There but for the grace of God go I. And so I stepped forward to extend to that person the same compassion and the same assistance that I would want to receive myself if I were in the same position. The problem with the epidemic of narcissism sweeping the country and possibly the world at the moment is that there is assumption that one will never be in that position. But as somebody told me, they say it always happens to somebody else. Sometimes you're somebody else's somebody else. It always happened to somebody else? Well, they said the same thing. It always happens to somebody else. Oh, me. Oops. And with suddenly no warning, I mean, life can change in a moment. I had a friend who was trying to do a routine loading of some some cattle into a trailer to haul them off to market, and for no apparent reason, one of them, well, there were several mishaps that combined. One was that the person who was supposed to drop the gate didn't release the rope fast enough, and the particular steer that ran into the trailer got to the end and turned around and started running out again. Well, the gate fell and landed on the steer's back. So my friend jumped up, grabbed the gate, the edges of the trailer, and kicked the steer in the face to make it jump backwards. The steer didn't jump backwards like everyone expected it would. It charged forward. He was folded over the head of the steer, and the steer kept running until it ran into a gate and knocked this heavy gate off of its hinges. It was very strong gate, but they crashed into it, and then they finally got the steer to back up. Well, when he hit the gate, he was between the steer and the gate, and one of his vertebrae was shattered, and he's been in a wheelchair ever since. And I mean, all of life changed in a split second, and you never know when it will happen, and you never know to whom it will happen. And so because of this basic understanding, there but for the grace of God go I, people came to help people. And the good side of that story, though, was that everyone assumed that was the end of his working on the ranch and so forth, and he basically said hell no and found ways to do all the ranching from the wheelchair. Got adaptive vehicles, got adaptive trucks, did whatever, and he's still doing it. Wonderful determination. But the point of sharing that story is just that, yes, everything can change in a moment, and we don't know in which direction. And that's where it becomes important to be there for each other. And organic communism is about believing and living like you believe that everyone matters, and that sometimes the one who can make a difference is me. And when I have opportunity to do something good, it's important for me to do it, because I won't always have opportunity. And unfortunately, all of us, most of us, encounter situations where there is a known problem, but we are faced with an experience of powerlessness. And the best we can do is have empathy and try to console the person, because there's nothing we can do. A loved one has died, and we grieve together, and we try to support each other emotionally, but ultimately it's a process to move through. It's a loss that can't be undone, and there's nothing we can do about it. All the more reason, when there is something, anything we can do, to seize that opportunity and do it, because there is no good act that is ever wasted. There is no giving of love or support or understanding or compassion to another person that is ever a wasted act. Those are not the kinds of things one ever regrets. In any case, this is a horrendously complex subject, and I'm quite sure that I've only scratched the surface. So I thank you for watching, and hope that some of the things I've shared have been helpful to you.